It's 11 a.m. in New York City, where jury instructions are underway in former President Donald Trump's criminal trial. Prosecutors accuse Trump of falsifying business records to cover up a payment made to adult film actor Stormy Daniels. Trump has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Let's bring in Errol Barnett and CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson to talk a little bit more about this. So, Errol, we talked about the hush money payments, but it's really not about the hush money payments. There's nothing illegal about that. It's the hush money payments in order to influence the 2016 election and keep keep the story under wraps, if you will, for a particular reason. It's kind of complicated. So what did the judge tell the jurors about what they should be contemplating before they head into deliberations?
Well, it's really interesting, Anne-Marie and Vlad, because the entire trial really comes down to this moment, these 12 jurors, their opinions, their experiences, and what their view of Donald Trump's guilt or innocence is based on the testimony, based on the evidence that's been laid out, and based on the law. Judge Merchant, just a short time ago, told the jury what the fundamental principles are. Remember, weeks ago, they were summoned to a courthouse, as so many of our viewers have been, in order to adjudicate a case. He told them that you must not forget the fundamental principle here is that defendants are innocent until proven guilty, and the burden of proof is on the people. It shifts. It never shifts from the people to the defendant. And so the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump committed these crimes. He also emphasized and reminded the jurors that they were told to set aside any opinions, any bias they have for or against the defendant. And if they decide this case against the defendant and the law, you must set aside all of that. You must not allow opinion or bias to influence your decision. So that's the introduction the jurors received this morning before we got to the specific elements of the law. And just remember what these 12 jurors have been through already. They were filtered down from hundreds. There was a frenzy at the time the jury was selected of people being identified in the press. Some jurors ducked out and said, I just can't do it. There were tears in the courtroom at that time. So these 12 were the ones who remained, the ones who were committed to sitting through what has been more than 5 weeks of testimony. And now we're in this 6th week. And now for the first time, after the jury finishes giving them instructions, they're going to speak to each other for the first time. And you can see the range of occupations they come from, not just two attorneys who will be well familiar with the law, but you've got a speech therapist, a software engineer, a retired wealth manager, and someone coming from investment banking, Vlad's old world. And so it really is a cross-section of New Yorkers, and you're seeing kind of the idea of a democratic judicial system at work when they all now will sit across from the table from each other for the first time and say, what do you think? We expect that to happen at any moment.
Jessica, the jury, as we've been saying for the last couple of days, begins those deliberations today. Remind us of some of the specifics. I mean, Anne-Marie sort of pointed it out earlier that it's not about those hush money payments. It's about making those payments to influence an election.
That's exactly right. And the defense has said over and over again, there's nothing illegal about hush money payments. That's right. There's nothing illegal about trying to influence an election. That's right. But the details here are different than just those broad strokes. And so what the jury is going to have to find, as we've been talking about, is one, that those business records were falsified, not by mistake, not by accident, but that the former president caused those business records to be falsified, that he wasn't really paying Michael Cohen for legal services. He was repaying him for the hush money payments. And that the reason the records were falsified is to try and cover up or commit another crime. And that other crime is not just interfering with the election, but doing so in an unlawful way. And then what is that unlawful way? The prosecution is pointing to campaign finance issues, tax issues, and other falsification of business records. So it's going to take the jury a moment. On the one hand, I think that we can say, well, that's a lot of steps for the jury. On the other hand, I think jurors have, and this isn't an inappropriate, kind of a gut sense of where they want to go. If they think the prosecution's story adds up, If they think that the prosecution proved this beyond a reasonable doubt, then I don't think we're going to see them hung up on each individual detail here. But a quick verdict is good for the prosecution. The longer it takes, the more excited the defense will be about their chances of a hung jury.
Errol, you've been outside of the courthouse pretty much every day. Aside from the senior fitness extravaganza that's happening close to you, it seems like in those last few weeks, there have been kind of more and more heavy hitters, if you will, showing up on behalf of the former president. And even yesterday, you know, some star power on behalf of the Biden campaign showed up for the first time. What's the scene like outside of the courthouse this morning?
That's right, Anne-Marie. It's been fascinating to be inside the courthouse and see the judicial process underway, and to see Donald Trump be tight-lipped, and then to see how it seems outside of the courthouse, with Donald Trump making statements to the press, and every now and then a few dozen pro-Trump supporters showing up at the park directly across the street from the courthouse, as well as anti-Trump protesters who would make their way down the street as well. We saw a large presence of both at the beginning of this trial, around the time of jury selection. That kind of ebbed and eased as we went through some of the star witnesses. And yes, in this last week, we've seen it kick up again. Yesterday was the largest contingency of Trump children we had seen, with Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, and Tiffany Trump. We also saw the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, show up at a certain stage and show support for Donald Trump. Members of the House Freedom Caucus have come to the courthouse and spoken about how this is also a sham trial, echoing Trump's words. But for the first time yesterday, we saw efforts from the Biden-Harris campaign to almost create some counter-programming with actor Robert De Niro and others who believe that Donald Trump isn't just someone who shouldn't be in the White House, but is a threat to democracy. So you've had this interesting split-screen experience covering this trial, where inside it's very dry, it's very methodical, it's very mechanical as far as how it moves through each process of a case. And while outside, it's been a little bit of a circus. I'll also share with you that at one point, a van filled with helium balloons opened behind the press and in front of the courthouse as images of Judge Merchan and Special Prosecutor Jack Smith were floating through the air. I mean, it was incredibly bizarre, and it was distributed by a pro-Trump supporter who says this trial is a sham. So there's been no shortage of political theatrics around this case, while inside that courthouse, it's been very dry and everything according to the law. A very kind of bizarre experience to watch this unfold these last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Jessica, are there additional considerations the judge has to take into account with these instructions due to Trump being such a divisive figure?
Well, I actually think it's kind of cuts the other way, in the sense of the judge is going to say, this is a defendant. This is a criminal defendant. I know, and he's not going to say this explicitly, but I know that this is the former president of the United States. I know this is arguably one of the most famous criminal defendants in our nation's history. But listen to what I'm saying. Listen to the burden of proof. Listen to the questions presented. Listen to how you find the answers. And so on the one hand, I think we can say everybody has said to this jury, or the judge has said to this jury, this is a criminal defendant, equal justice under the law. On the other hand, I frankly think it strains common sense to think that in the back of their mind, they don't understand the implications here. And I think that could actually play potentially well for the defense, in terms of they might be hesitant, and this is guessing, but they might be hesitant to say, we want to convict the former president because it would be such a historic first. The hope is that the jury goes back to that room and they say, let's talk about whether this person, this defendant, committed these criminal acts. And they don't say, let's talk about whether or not the former president committed these acts.
All right, Errol, Jessica, thank you both very, very much. We'll be checking in with you, of course, throughout the course of the day, especially if we do get a verdict within the next hour or so.